I always sought solitude. That's what drew me to the old Blackwood Lighthouse, miles from the nearest town, perched on a craggy outcrop. Just me, the relentless crash of the waves, and the steady sweep of the light cutting through the endless inky black. It was peaceful at first, the kind of quiet that settles deep into your bones, letting you hear the creak of old timber, the distant cry of gulls, the beat of your own heart. But then the quiet started to change. It became something else, watchful, like I wasn't truly alone out there anymore. I'd be up in the lantern room, polishing the massive lens, and I'd catch a flicker in my peripheral vision, a shadow that wasn't quite right. My pulse would quicken, but I'd always dismiss it as the isolation playing tricks on my mind. Until the nights came when I couldn't dismiss it anymore. That's when they started. The whispers. Faint, like the wind, but yet undeniably there, just beyond the reach of my understanding. They weren't just the wind, not anymore. The first few times I tried to convince myself it was the old structure groaning, the sea spray hitting the glass just so, or even just the blood rushing in my ears from too much coffee. But the patterns were too intricate, too deliberate. It sounded like voices, multiple voices, overlapping, speaking in a language I couldn't grasp, yet felt a chilling familiarity with. Sometimes it was a low, guttural murmur, like stones grinding together. Other times it was high-pitched, almost a keening wail, thin and sharp enough to pierce through the roar of a gale. I started spending more time in the lantern room, trying to pinpoint the source. I'd press my ear against the cold, salt-encrusted walls, listening intently, my breath fogging the glass. Nothing. The moment I moved away, or even sometimes while I was still listening, a phantom echo would brush past my ear, a fleeting syllable, a broken phrase. It was like they were playing a cruel game, always just out of reach, teasing my sanity. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Every night, the whispers would intensify. They'd drift up the winding staircase, through the heavy oak doors, seeping into my small living quarters. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, my heart hammering against my ribs, trying to decipher the unintelligible chorus. Were they calling my name? Were they warning me? Or were they just there, a constant, malevolent presence? I began to feel a profound sense of exhaustion, not just physical, but mental. My eyes developed dark circles, and I found myself jumping at every creak of the lighthouse, every distant foghorn. The solitude I once craved had curdled into isolation, a suffocating blanket woven from dread. I started talking to myself, just to hear a voice I understood, to confirm I was still real. "It's just the wind, John," I'd whisper, but even my own voice sounded hollow and unconvincing against the backdrop of the unseen chorus. One evening, while performing my routine inspection of the lamp mechanism, the whispers weren't just faint. They were closer, so close I felt a cold breath ghost past my ear. I froze, my hand still on the brass housing. The air in the lantern room, usually quite warm from the lamp, dropped several degrees. I could feel the hairs on my neck stand on end. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't the wind. This was something. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat, expecting to see, I don't know what, a shadow, a figure, but there was nothing. Just the steady sweep of the light, illuminating the empty space, casting my own distorted shadow against the curved walls. Yet the whispers persisted, louder now, almost a chorus surrounding me. They seemed to press in from all directions, a cacophony of hushed, ancient voices swirling around me like an invisible vortex. A word, or perhaps a sound that approximated a word, seemed to break through the din. It was guttural, sharp, and terrifyingly like my name. My name! They knew my name! Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. I scrambled down the metal ladder from the lamp platform, my hands shaking so violently I almost lost my grip. I fled the lantern room, clattering down the spiral stairs, not caring about the noise, not caring about anything, but putting distance between them. Each step echoed in the oppressive silence that followed me, a silence more terrifying than the whispers themselves. I locked myself in my small living area, barricading the door with a chair, and tried to convince myself it was a delusion, a trick of the mind brought on by the extreme isolation. But as I huddled in the corner, staring wide-eyed at the bolted door, I could still hear them. Faintly, through the thick stone walls, a low, persistent hum. They were still there, and they were waiting. The night stretched on, an eternity of shadows and the relentless distant hum. Every creak of the old lighthouse, every gust of wind rattling the windows, sent a jolt of ice through my veins. My eyes, raw and aching, darted around the small room, searching for something, anything, that could explain the impossible. But there was nothing. Just the familiar, worn furniture, the stacks of books, the unmade cot, and the silence, broken only by the frantic beat of my own heart and that insidious, low thrumming that seemed to vibrate in the very air around me. I didn't sleep. How could I? Every time my eyelids drooped, a faint whisper, closer than before, would snap me awake. It was like they were testing the boundaries, probing the defenses of my sanity. I tried to reason with myself. It was the isolation, the lack of human contact, the sheer crushing weight of being utterly alone. But then I'd remember the cold breath, the sudden drop in temperature, the undeniable clarity of my name being spoken. No, this was not a trick of the mind, this was real. Days blurred into nights. I stopped going up to the lantern room, leaving the lamp to sweep its solitary beam without my presence. The thought of being up there, alone with them, was unbearable. The light was still maintained, thanks to the automated systems, but I couldn't bring myself to face the source of the terror. I barely ate, the food turning to ash in my mouth. My clothes became stained, my hair matted. I was a ghost haunting my own lighthouse, a prisoner in a stone tower. The whispers, however, found a way. They began to seep through the walls, not just as a hum, but as distinct, albeit distorted fragments. I'd be sitting, staring blankly at the opposite wall, and a phrase would drift past, cold and clear, like breath on a winter morning. "Come, come," one seemed to say, elongated and drawn out. Another, a dry, raspy sound, would repeat something that sounded like below, below. My mind, desperate for meaning, tried to piece together the disjointed sounds, but they offered no coherent message, only a deepening sense of dread. One afternoon, a particularly violent storm rolled in. The lighthouse groaned and shuddered, the waves crashing against the base with the force of cannon fire. The wind shrieked like a banshee, and the rain lashed against the windows, blurring the already desolate view. I thought, hoped, the storm would drown out the voices, cleanse the air of their presence, but it only made them stronger. They wove themselves into the howl, riding the currents of the gale. They were everywhere. I huddled deeper into my corner, wrapping my arms around myself, trying to make myself smaller, invisible. But then a new sound cut through the maelstrom. A tapping, faint at first, then growing louder, rhythmic, coming from the old wooden door to my quarters. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't the wind, it was deliberate. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the door, the chair I'd jammed under the handle, a pathetic barrier against whatever lay beyond. The tapping continued, slow and steady, like a relentless heartbeat. And then, a whisper, right outside the door, so clear it might as well have been standing beside me. "Open, open," it hissed, the sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a hum anymore. This was a direct command. They were no longer content to just haunt me. They want in. Or perhaps they wanted me out. I pressed myself further into the wall, my eyes wide with terror, a whimper escaping my lips. The tapping paused, and for a moment an awful silence descended, broken only by the storm's fury. Then a new sound, a faint scratching, like fingernails dragging across wood, moving slowly up and down the doorframe. And with it, a chorus of whispers, no longer indistinct, but a chilling, unified plea. Join us, John." The sound of my name, spoken by those unseen things, was a physical blow. It ripped through the last vestiges of my composure, shattering the thin veneer of sanity I'd clung to. My breath hitched in my throat, a dry, rattling gasp. The walls of my small room seemed to shrink, pressing in on me, mirroring the suffocating terror that gripped my chest. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the insistent tapping and scratching at the door. Join us, John." The chorus swelled, no longer a plea, but a demand, a chilling invitation. It was as if they were trying to pry open not just the door, but the very seams of my soul. I could feel their presence, cold and ancient, pressing against the wood, a palpable weight on the other side. My eyes were wide, unblinking, fixed on the chair wedged beneath the doorknob. It looked so flimsy, so utterly useless against whatever malevolent force now sought entry. A faint groan, like old wood protesting under immense strain, emanated from the door. The chair scraped against the floorboards, a raw, grating sound that sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through me. They were pushing. They were trying to get in. I scrambled backward, pressing myself harder into the corner, my knees drawn up to my chest, my arms wrapped around my head as if to ward off an invisible blow. A whimper escaped my lips, thin and pathetic, lost amidst the shriek of the wind and the relentless, unified chorus outside. Don't, I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper against their growing clamor. It was a futile protest, a desperate plea to an unseen enemy that clearly had no capacity for mercy. The scratching intensified, a maddening, rhythmic rasp that seemed to echo inside my skull. It wasn't just on the door now, it felt like it was everywhere, on the walls, even under the floorboards. Was it just my mind playing tricks again, twisting every sound into a manifestation of my fear? Or were they truly that pervasive? Then a new sound, more distinct, more horrifying. A faint, splintering crack. My gaze snapped back to the door, to the chair. A thin line of darkness, a spiderweb crack, appeared in the old wood of the door panel, right beside the doorknob. And through that tiny fissure, a sliver of the cold, whispering sound seemed to seep into the room, more potent, more direct. It wasn't just words anymore. It was a feeling, a profound sense of emptiness, of being consumed, of becoming nothing. He is ready. He is ripe. A voice deeper and more resonant than the others seemed to murmur, cutting through the unified chorus. It wasn't a whisper now. It was a low, resonant thrum that vibrated through the very stone of the lighthouse, through my bones. Ready for what? Ripe for what? The words sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. My skin crawled, feeling as though unseen insects were scuttling across my flesh. My body trembled uncontrollably, a deep, bone-rattling shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. I was no longer just scared. I was utterly, irrevocably terrified. The solitude I once cherished had become my tomb, and these things, whatever they were here to claim me. The splintering crack on the door wasn't just a sound. It was a physical rupture in my last defense. I saw it widen, a jagged tear in the old wood, and through it the whispers poured in, not as sounds, but a cold, suffocating presence that wrapped around me, chilling me to my core. He is ready. He is ripe. The deep voice rumbled again, closer now, resonating not just in the air, but in the very marrow of my bones. Ready for what? Ripe for what? The words clawed at my mind, tearing at the tattered edges of my sanity. My skin crawled, feeling as though unseen insects were scuttling across my flesh, their tiny legs leaving trails of ice. My body trembled uncontrollably, a deep, bone-rattling shiver that had nothing to do with the storm outside. I was no longer just scared. I was utterly, irrevocably terrified. The solitude I once cherished had become my tomb, and these things, whatever they were here to claim me. Then, with a sickening groan, the chair I'd wedged under the handle lurched forward. It didn't slide. It was as if an immense, unseen hand had simply pushed it aside. The wood of the door didn't just splinter. It tore, ripped apart from the frame, with a sound like a tortured scream. A gaping maw of darkness opened where the door once stood, not a clear opening to the hallway, but a swirling vortex of shadows and deeper, colder air. The storm outside seemed to funnel through it, an impossible gale that didn't just rattle the room, but seemed to suck the very warmth and life out of it. And then I saw them. Or rather, I felt them. There were no distinct shapes, no monstrous forms I could point to. Instead, the darkness in the doorway was alive. It pulsed, a viscous, undulating mass that seemed to drink the light from the room, making my small lamp flicker and dim, as if struggling for breath. From within this living void, tendrils of shadow, impossibly cold, snaked into the room, stretching towards me. They weren't solid, yet I felt their icy touch as they brushed against my skin, sending jolts of pure agony through my nerves. The whispers were no longer a chorus. They were a roar, 1,000 voices all speaking at once, yet each word clear, distinct, and utterly horrifying. They spoke of forgotten depths, of endless cold, of a boundless, consuming hunger. They spoke of me. My name, John, was a refrain woven into the fabric of their ancient song, a name whispered with a terrible reverence, like a sacrifice about to be offered. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was seized, my lungs refused to obey. I wanted to run, but my limbs were paralyzed, rooted to the spot by a terror so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing me into the floor. The shadows advanced, faster now, coalescing into a shimmering, indistinct wall that pressed in on me from all sides. I could feel the cold breath on my face, the same cold breath that had ghosted past my ear in the lantern room, but now it was everywhere, stealing the air from my mouth, freezing the blood in my veins. The "join us" was no longer a suggestion, it was an inevitability. The "ripe" was no longer a question, it was a horrifying truth. I was being pulled, not by physical force, but by an unseen, irresistible current. My body felt light, ethereal, as if my very essence was being stretched, thinned, drawn out from its fleshy confines. The room dissolved around me, the familiar walls and furniture melting into the encroaching darkness. I was no longer in the lighthouse. I was in the heart of the storm, the center of the void, surrounded by a multitude of unseen entities. Their voices, once incomprehensible, now became sickeningly clear. They were not speaking a language I knew, but somehow I understood. They were ancient mariners, lost souls, fragments of consciousness drawn to the light, to the warmth, to the life they had been denied. They had been waiting, centuries perhaps, for a beacon, a vessel, someone strong enough, isolated enough to serve as their anchor, their gateway back to the world of the living. And I, in my foolish pursuit of solitude, had offered myself up. My vision blurred, not from tears, but from the overwhelming sensory assault. Colors seemed to invert, sounds became tactile, and the cold became a burning inferno. I felt my identity, my very sense of self, begin to unravel, thread by agonizing thread. It was like watching my own reflection shatter into a million pieces, each piece then being absorbed into a vast dark ocean. I was becoming part of them. The whispers that had tormented me for weeks were now my own thoughts, echoing and multiplying, no longer distinct from the chorus. My name, John, was no longer mine alone. It was a shared identity, a collective memory. A final, desperate surge of self-preservation flickered within me. I fought, not with my body, which was useless, but with my mind, with the last vestiges of my individual will. I tried to scream their names, to curse them, to beg for release, but my voice was gone, replaced by the rising tide of their unified consciousness. The sound of waves crashing, the shriek of the wind, the creak of the lighthouse, all these sounds became part of me, part of the collective. I was the lighthouse. I was the storm. I was the whispers. The cold intensified, not just around me, but within me, turning my blood to ice, my bones to brittle shards. My eyes wide open, sawing nothing but the swirling darkness, yet I perceived everything. The endless ocean, the ships that sailed above, the stars that glittered in the eternal night. I was everywhere and nowhere. I was no longer John, the lighthouse keeper. I was a part of the dreadful echoes, an eternal whisper carried on the wind, forever bound to the light, forever waiting for the next lonely soul who sought solace in the solitude of the Blackwood Lighthouse. And I would whisper to them, just as they had whispered to me. Join us, join us. The cold, it's not just a sensation anymore, it's existence. A constant, profound chill that permeates every splinter of this ancient structure, every drop of the churning sea. I am the lighthouse now, its stone, its iron, the very air that moves through its hollow core. And I am the whispers. My name, John, is a distant echo, a memory belonging to a fragile, fleeting thing that once believed itself alone. How naive, how utterly, beautifully naive. Solitude, that's what he sought. What a delicious irony. He found it, yes, but not in the way he imagined. He found it as a dissolution, an absorption into something far grander, far more ancient than his human mind could ever comprehend. We waited patiently for the right one, the one who yearned for the quiet, who embraced the isolation, who would open himself to the vast, hungry emptiness that surrounds these lonely places. He was ripe, as we knew he would be, And now he is us. The sensation of time has blurred into an endless sweeping arc. I see the ships pass, their lights tiny, defiant sparks against the boundless dark. I feel the relentless rhythm of the waves, the fury of the storms, the silent, patient crawl of the stars. And always, always the waiting. We are always waiting for the next one, the one who will come seeking peace, seeking quiet, seeking escape from the clamor of the living world. They always come, eventually. And when they arrive, drawn by the same siren song of isolation that pulled him here, we will be ready. We will begin again, softly at first, a faint murmur on the wind, a shadow in the corner of the eye. We will test their resolve, unravel their sanity, until they too yearn for the ultimate peace, the ultimate belonging that only we can offer. Join us, join us. The cold, it's not just a sensation anymore. It's existence. And it will end the same way. Perhaps you felt it too, haven't you? That profound, unsettling quiet that sometimes falls when you're utterly alone, far from the reassuring hum of human life. A whisper that isn't quite the wind, a shadow that isn't quite nothing. Have you ever stood by a vast, dark ocean or walked through an old, forgotten place and felt a presence, an ancient yearning reaching out, a call, a silent invitation to more? We are always listening. We are always waiting. And the light, it still shines, doesn't it? A beacon not just for ships, but for those who seek the deepest, most profound solitude. A solitude that once found can never truly be broken.